When the shift begins inside you, she didn't notice it at first. After years of living inside a cycle of silence and sudden returns, she expected her body to tense up every time his name appeared on her phone. But that morning it didn't. Her stomach didn't drop. Her hands didn't shake. Her mind didn't race. She simply looked at the message and felt nothing. Not anger. Not hope. Just quiet. That tiny, almost accidental moment is where true emotional detachment begins. Not when you stop loving, but when your mind stops needing the emotional signal he once controlled. In hundreds of anonymous stories online, women describe this shift the same way. It felt like I woke up 1 inch at a time. I didn't decide to detach. My mind started doing it for me. I wasn't free yet, but I wasn't trapped the same way anymore. This phase is powerful because it happens internally, before any spoken decision. It is not rebellion. It is not confrontation. It is the slow withdrawal of attention, which is the only fuel the cycle ever needed. People imagine detachment as a dramatic exit, but it almost never looks like that. Detachment begins quietly, invisibly. It begins with the thought you don't chase, the message you don't reread, the apology you don't craft, the silence you don't interpret as danger anymore. And he feels that shift before you do. Why? Because emotional manipulation depends on predictability. When you stop responding in the way the cycle trained you to respond, even slightly, the entire structure begins to weaken. Not because he lost interest, but because your mind stopped orbiting around his emotional weather. This shift, subtle as it seems, is the moment the storyline changes hands. It is the beginning of you. When he senses the change first. Maria shared a story that mirrors thousands of others. After years of absorbing silent treatment, reactive coldness, and unpredictable affection, she reached a point where her mind simply unlatched. She didn't announce a breakup. She didn't confront him. She didn't write long paragraphs at 2:00 a.m. She just stopped trying to decode him. That's when he noticed. Not when she cried. Not when she begged. Not when she asked for conversations. He noticed when she stopped performing the emotional role he had built around her. This is a pattern survivors describe everywhere online. He sensed I wasn't afraid anymore, and that's when he panicked. He suddenly became affectionate, but it felt off. It was like he was trying to pull me back to a version of myself that no longer existed. A cycle of emotional control relies heavily on reaction. He watches your tone, your urgency, your guilt, your fear of losing him, your attempts to restore harmony. When those signals fade, even slightly, he feels it immediately, because unpredictability destabilizes emotional control. It removes the foundation of the cycle. Your fear of disappointing him. Your fear of abandonment. Your fear of miscommunicating. Women often report he becomes unusually attentive, warm, or nostalgic during this phase. But this isn't connection. It's calibration. It's him testing whether the emotional leash still exists. And this is where retention spikes in. Videos like this because the audience recognizes themselves in the moment of being pursued not out of love, but out of loss of control. The key truth is this. Your detachment threatens his predictability. Your calm threatens his strategy. Your neutrality threatens his power structure. This is the phase he never prepares for, because he believes control is permanent, until your mind proves otherwise. The everyday moments that prove you're detaching. There was a moment, a small one, that Marta didn't recognize as a turning point until much later. He sent her a text. "Are you okay? You seem distant." Months earlier, this message would have made her stomach twist, her fingers shake, her mind spiral into a checklist of what did I do wrong. But that day, she simply looked at the message, put her phone down, and continued what she was doing. Not out of spite, not out of strategy, but because her mind was no longer living in the emotional urgency he had conditioned into her. This is how internal detachment begins, in the tiny shifts of your normal day. It doesn't start during breakups or dramatic confrontations. It starts in the silence between text notifications. It starts in the moment you choose your task over your fear. It starts when your nervous system doesn't leap into alert mode at the sound of his name. Survivors describe dozens of these micromoments. I didn't reread his message 3 times before replying. I didn't feel the need to fix the mood in the room. I felt peaceful when he wasn't around, and that scared me, because it felt like the truth. His affection didn't feel like a reward anymore. It felt like a pattern I could predict. The power of this phase lies in its invisibility. You are not trying to detach. You're simply responding. From a place of regaining your mind stops valuing crumbs, because it remembers it once ate full meals. This is why this stage is often misunderstood. Outsiders think detachment looks like anger or confrontation, but real detachment looks like calm. Calm in your tone. Calm in your breathing. Calm in your choices. Calm in the face of someone who once felt like emotional gravity. You begin to trust your internal temperature more than his emotional weather. You begin to understand that your peace is not fragile. It was just buried. This part resonates deeply because the viewer realizes detachment isn't dramatic, it's honest. And honesty is what begins the quiet exit from a cycle that once felt unescapable. When detachment becomes an identity shift. Clara told a story that illustrates the heart of this phase. She said, "One day, I caught myself apologizing for something I didn't even feel guilty about. And in that moment, I thought, who am I performing for?" This single question marks the transition from emotional detachment to identity awakening. For years, she had adjusted her tone, her reactions, even her hobbies to avoid emotional punishment or to win back his temporary warmth. But once her mind began detaching, she started noticing how much of herself had been shaped around his needs, not her values. This is where real transformation begins. You stop asking, "Why does he treat me like this?" and begin asking, "Why did I believe this was the cost of love?" Detachment turns into identity shift when you speak slower, choosing clarity over appeasement. You say no without rehearsing. You no longer explain your feelings with desperation. You no longer interpret discomfort as your fault. You start enjoying silence, not fearing it. Emotional control thrives when your identity is blurred. Emotional liberation begins when your identity becomes visible again. Many survivors describe this phase as spiritual, not just psychological, because it feels like returning to a self that had been asleep under layers of survival, strategies, and emotional negotiations. You rediscover preferences you forgot you had. You reconnect with your voice, not as a weapon or a plea, but as a simple statement of truth. You begin to understand that love cannot require the erasure of self to function. This phase is powerful because it reframes everything. He didn't lose power because you pulled away. He lost power because you came back to yourself. And that is a shift no manipulative dynamic knows how to compete with, because control relies on confusion, and your mind is no longer confused. The 48-hour reset, a practical shift that changes everything. Julia's breakthrough came from something surprisingly small. After a particularly draining argument, she decided she wouldn't fix anything for 48 hours, not out of anger, but because she had nothing left to give. She expected guilt, anxiety, spiraling thoughts, but instead, she felt something unfamiliar: relief. For the first time in years, her nervous system wasn't waiting for him to react. She wasn't bracing for silence or preparing emotional explanations. She simply allowed space. This accidental experiment is what later became known to her as a 48-hour internal reset. A simple but powerful pattern interrupt. The reset works like this. 1. Observe. Don't react. When he withdraws, calls, texts, or shifts tone, you watch it happen without immediately responding emotionally. This disrupts the training loop. 2. Name your internal state, not his behavior. Instead of "he's doing this again," it becomes, "I feel tension right now. I feel pressure to respond. I feel the urge to fix this." Naming your emotion returns authorship to you. 3. Delay emotional decisions. You respond later, when your body is calm. Not because of strategy, but because regulation precedes clarity. This small reset breaks the autopilot of emotional conditioning. Your mind stops reacting out of habit and begins responding out of awareness. And awareness is what dissolves manipulation from the inside out. Survivors who try this report something unexpected. He didn't know what to do when I didn't immediately react. He became nicer. Then irritated. Then confused. He didn't realize my silence wasn't fear anymore, it was clarity. The 48-hour reset isn't about punishing him. It's about reprogramming your nervous system, so your peace isn't dependent on his approval or attention. You are teaching your mind a truth it had forgotten. You are allowed to exist without monitoring someone else's emotions. And once the mind learns that, the cycle loses its grip. When neutrality breaks the cycle. Rachel remembered the exact moment the dynamic cracked. He had sent a long, emotionally loaded message, the kind that used to send her into panic, apology, and justification. She read it, she waited, and then she replied with a simple, calm sentence. I need some time to think. I'll respond later. She wasn't cold. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was neutral, and that neutrality was the earthquake he never expected. Across thousands of survivor accounts, this moment repeats itself with uncanny similarity. The manipulative partner doesn't crumble when you yell, cry, or beg. Those reactions still keep you inside the emotional choreography. But neutrality.com/unreactive. Self-possessed neutrality disrupts the rhythm. Because neutrality is not silence. Neutrality is self-regulation. It signals that your emotions are no longer available as a playground. Survivors report the same pattern. He became strangely affectionate. He suddenly acted like I was distant. He started pushing buttons harder. He got quiet, but not the same kind of quiet. It was uncertainty this time. You can almost feel the shift. Not the silence that punished you, but the silence that unnerves him. Neutrality breaks the cycle because it removes the emotional fuel he counted on: fear, urgency, guilt, panic. Without those reactions, control loses its structure. And here lies the uncomfortable truth manipulators never prepare for. They know how to handle your tears. They know how to handle your anger. They know how to handle your apologies. But they do not know how to handle your calm. Calm means you see the pattern. Calm means you stopped personalizing his behaviors. Calm means you're detaching not from the person, but from the emotional choreography. In this phase, your neutrality becomes more powerful than any confrontation. It is the first time your nervous system chooses you instead of the cycle. This is why survivors often describe neutrality as the moment they felt themselves returning to their own life. The unexpected benefits of mental detachment. Alina described the strangest thing. When I stopped needing him emotionally, I didn't feel empty. I felt spacious. She expected grief, loneliness, maybe guilt, but what she found instead was mental oxygen. For years, her mind had been crowded with fear-based thoughts. What did he mean by that tone? Is he upset? Did I say something wrong? Should I check on him again? Will he go silent tonight? These questions used to occupy every mental corner of her day. But detachment doesn't just remove the person, it removes the noise. And suddenly, she had space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to make decisions. Space to remember who she was. Space to imagine life without tiptoeing. This is the part survivors rarely expect, but always recognize when they reach it. The mind doesn't collapse when it detaches, it expands. Because when you are no longer emotionally regulated by someone else's mood, your nervous system begins reorganizing itself around your internal stability, instead of external unpredictability. Survivors often say, I didn't realize how much emotional maintenance I was doing until it stopped. I had opinions again. I had preferences again. I found myself laughing alone. Genuinely. I didn't feel watched anymore. These are not dramatic victories. They are quiet, steady returns of identity, the kind of changes that remain invisible from the outside, but feel monumental from within. What's most powerful is that this detachment doesn't require you to hate him or cut yourself off emotionally overnight. It only requires your mind to stop depending on him. And once the dependency breaks, the dynamic can no longer control you, because you stopped feeding the fear that kept it alive. The new gravity. When your life becomes the center, there comes a moment when your life becomes the center of your emotional universe. Again, not his silence. Not his return. Not his moods. For Sophia, this moment arrived unexpectedly. She was at a cafe, reading, when she realized half the day had passed without thinking about him. Not because she was repressing thoughts, but because her mind simply didn't orbit around his emotional weather anymore. This is what detachment truly looks like. Your life becomes heavier, fuller, more gravitational than the cycle that once pulled you in. Everything changes subtly. His silence no longer dictates your anxiety. His return no longer dictates your relief. His approval no longer dictates your worth. His attention no longer dictates your identity. You stop being a satellite and become a center. What makes this part deeply emotional for viewers is that many have never experienced their own life as a gravitational force. They've spent years, sometimes decades, in emotional orbit around someone else. But once your world regains its center, the cycle loses its structure. Control cannot survive when it is no longer the sun in your psychological sky. And here lies the bridge to the next chapter. Phase 1, silence punishes your voice. Phase 2, the return tests your loyalty. Phase 3, the detachment rewrites your internal gravity. Now comes Phase 4, the phase he never expected. When your nervous system stops believing the old story. This phase doesn't break the cycle. It dissolves it. The doorway to the next chapter. A woman once wrote, "The moment I stopped needing his validation was the moment I began meeting myself. For the first time." This final phase is not about leaving him. It's about leaving the emotional choreography that kept you small. When the mind detaches, your reactions stop being predictable. Your fear stops being accessible. Your worth stops being negotiable. Your peace stops being conditional. Your identity stops being shaped by his moods. This is the moment he loses his power. Not when you walk away, but when you stop walking back emotionally. Your neutrality, your calm, your clarity. These are the signs that the cycle's emotional hooks have loosened. This is where healing begins to feel like self-respect, not resistance. And now, the journey continues. ***, the next video will reveal Phase 4. When your nervous system stops believing the old story. ***, that is where the deepest transformation happens, not in your thoughts, not in your actions, but in your biological memory of what love is supposed to feel like. Close with a doorway, not a command. When did you first notice your mind stepping away? Even before you did. This question ignites stories, builds community, strengthens connection, and shifts viewers from mere watching to participating in their own awakening.